This tutorial is going to step you through section 9.6, the game over scenario. And basically we are going to put a end of game scoreboard on to the game, and it'll be very similar to what you're asked to do in your semester project. If I place one in here right now as an example, it'll look something like that. And the way that that's created, if we take a look, we have a class that's called scoreboard, and the textbook would like you to look at that a little bit. I'm not going to do much with it, but I'm going to point out a couple of things. Please notice the use of constants. That's always good practice in your program. And so the width and the height are set at 400 and 300. And so if you ever need to change that, then all you have to do is change it in one place in your code. Also notice there's two constructors, scoreboard and scoreboard with an integer value being sent in. The other thing is that there's all these options that you can change. You can change the color, you can change the title, you can change what's printed on it by changing this text here. You can change, seems to me like the transparency of it somewhere, and that might be in here. I'm not sure. There's a red, green, blue. I know that the new color red, green, blue, and I'm not sure what the 128 does. But those are all things that you can play around with and change a little bit. I'm not going to do that right now because you guys can do that on your own as you apply this to your own game. If we go back, then we are going to take a look at the space class. And the space class has a game over method in it. And right now there's nothing in it. Yours probably says that you need to do the implementation here. And basically what we want to do is we want to add a scoreboard to our world when the game is over. And to add anything to a world, we do add object. And when we add an object to the world, you specify the object with the new keyword. And in this case, we're going to do a new scoreboard. And 999 just for a score. And then we always have an X and a Y location. Now, in order to get this to look fairly decent, it's centered right in the middle of the world. What we're going to do to center that is, instead of just putting in hard coding that code in, what we want to do is get the screen width, get width, and that's a method, so there's parentheses, and then we're going to divide it in half to take half of it. Likewise, we're going to get the height, parentheses, because it's a method, and then divide by 2. And that's going to place the scoreboard in the center of our world. Next, we're going to take a look at where we're going to call this method from. And that's going to need to occur when the rocket dies or disappears. And the rocket disappears in our check collision. So I'm in the rocket class now, and this is the code that we had before. And when the rocket dies, it is removed from the world. And this is where we want to call the check, not check collision, but call the game over. So I declared this local variable world, and I want to call up the game over from within the space class. That's where we wrote it, and it's going to be world.gameover. Now some of you might already be understanding that this is actually not going to work. When I compile, I'm going to get an error message. I might get more than one, but I'm expecting at least one. And the error message is they cannot find the symbol class scoreboard. And that's because if I take a look at that one, that actually looks okay, except it's scored board. So that's not okay. We're going to recompile. And then we cannot find the method game over. Well, on the one I just fixed, that was a typo. And so I had the wrong name here. And so that was fixed by just a typo. But if I take a look at game over, that's typed correctly. There's something else going on. Whenever you see this message that says cannot find symbol, that means that it's this method or variable or whatever it's looking at is not declared for this object. And what that means is, in our case, if we go back, the world class, if I take a look at the documentation for Greenfoot, does not have a method called game over. If I go down, these are all alphabetical. There is no game over method here. I have an add object method. I have a get object methods. I have a remove object, which is what I used here. I used a remove object and an add object. So add object and remove object worked because those objects, those methods were declared within the world class. However, game over is declared in the space class. So it has a more specific definition. And what happens in programs is that you cannot use this more specific definition with a broader declaration of the world. So what we have to do, we actually need to change this declaration. We need to use not a world class, but a space class. And in order to do that, we're going to use something called casting. And it's going to look like the following. We're going to create a space, and instead of world, we're going to call it space. We're still going to call get world, because if I go over here, space is a world. So get world is the correct method, but what I need to do is what's called casting. I need to cast the world to a space declaration. And then I can use space as my object that is calling these methods. Because space is a world, the add object and remove object will work. And because game over was declared in space, it should compile now, unless I have some typos somewhere. It says that it compiles. We're going to come back. Everything's compiled here. We're going to, I don't know if I need to reset the game. Looks like it's reset. I'm going to place the ship so it's going to get hit right away. And run. Well, that didn't help it get hit right away, did it? Game over. There was an explosion and the game is over. And the asteroids were going. And so that creates the game over method. But more importantly, and your textbook talks about this more, we talked through again how to define or use an object that has its own methods defined, as well as the objects of its superclass. So in order to use both objects of the superclass and objects of the current class, we needed to use what was called casting. So I used the getWorld method, but I cast it as a data type space, so then it needed to be assigned to a variable that was declared as a space. Please talk to your instructor, talk to me if that's not making sense, because that's a very important concept. That's called using your hierarchy here, and it's also kind of a form of, I want to say, polymorphism, because you are using or reusing the methods from this other class. But polymorphism is actually